Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I am Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
I wanted to share with you a couple of listener messages.
Listener messages.
Listener messages.
I'm excited.
That made me happy, and I know would make you happy. So
I am
here we go.
Very much ready to be happy.
Okay.
Please.
This is from Marie. Re-listening to your shows on the long drive from West Palm Beach, Florida to Elmira Heights, New York, and seeing many connections, Marty Tankleff and Suffolk Police and Lisk. Their corruption gave Rex Heuermann free rein to run amok, especially Thomas Spotto, who covered up for a bunch of people. Poor Marty was just one in a long line of victims. I thought it was so interesting that she made the connection with Lisk.
I can't believe that she's driving from Florida to Elmira.
Well, there's that, too.
There's that. Marie, you are a road warrior.
All right, and this is from Elise. Meg, I just have to say that the more of your podcasts that I listen to, I'm now up to August 2023. You've got so much more to go, Elise. The more I marvel at how many cultural touchstones I share with you and Jessica. Often these are the small details, like the giant plastic rainbow comb in the back pocket, sharing wifey in secret at camp, watching Sue Simmons nightly, and loving Delia Ephron?
Yes, Delia
Ephron's How to Eat Like a Child. I still have my copy.
Oh, send us a photo of your copy.
That would be amazing.
That would be
seriously.
so great.
My grandparents, well, 3 out of 4, and parents were all born in New York City, but I grew up in Connecticut and started coming into the city with friends starting at about age 12. I was here as much as I could throughout the 80s and moved here in 1989 after graduating college. This is just to say thank you and thank Jessica for your wonderful storytelling. It's needed so much, especially right now.
Thank you, Elise. I'm crying. That is honestly the nice. That's like, can we frame that? Print it and frame it?
And I have to say, when I did read, I was having a really crapola day.
I
when
know.
I read this and I was like, how does the universe know? I mean, we should realize that if you have the instinct to reach out to somebody and say something really thoughtful and kind, like do it, because it really has an impact.
I'm going to share something about myself that you may or may not know.
Okay.
As you know, I know you know this, I have a little problem with depression.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very attuned to this and like how I can have at least a temporary lift from kindness, which also reduces me, as you well know, to tears. So it's a double-edged sword because I can't handle kindness that well. But I try to make a point every day to compliment someone on something they're wearing or something that I see them doing.
Nice.
And the reaction is nearly always the same. It's, oh, thank you. And the brightness on their faces is just, and it makes me always realize, because as we all know, I can be a little crusty, how it takes nothing. It takes nothing to transform someone else's day. And on Thanksgiving, when I was on my way to your apartment, there was an old couple walking down the street slowly. She had a walker, like a, the thing with wheels that's like, it's not a walker, but
it helps you stay awake.
Yeah, exactly. And she was wearing the most fabulous, like, yachting cap, but in black leather. And I was like, Captain and Tennille, but dangerous. Oh, and I just said, excuse me, ma'am. Like, I couldn't help myself. I love your hat. And they both stopped and she transformed, like her entire being transformed. So I agree with you. And it's something that I think it's really easy to imagine yourself when you're feeling horrible, getting a compliment or just some kind of recognition from anybody and how that can make you feel like a human being.
Yeah.
I love that Elise did that for you today. I'm not in one of my darkest places. So that's why I'm saying I need to print that out and put it on my wall so I can be like,
in case of emergency,
break glass.
the seal.
Yes.
Okay, before we get started, remember how we talked about how this podcast is kind of like a diary for us? And what is the big crazy ass thing that happened this week that everybody in New York City is talking about?
It's insane.
It's so crazy.
It's so crazy. Okay. You say what it was.
The CEO of United Healthcare was gunned down in the street, like this is such a busy block. I can't begin to tell you. It is crowded, especially this time of year.
It's 6:45 a.m., but still there are people on the street.
Oh,
this is not, like the wee hours of nothing.
And now the guy who did it is a fugitive, and we're getting more and more information about him. And honestly, like, my family is a little bit obsessed.
Well, what is so interesting,
and so was my cab driver. And so are you. I know you were.
Yes. Are you kidding me? Like, for our listeners, this is what you and I were discussing in my kitchen as we were making tea and getting ready to do this podcast, that it's so difficult to not have a really mixed emotional reaction to this. And it makes you feel like a non-human that you have a mixed emotional reaction. It's extremely
I wasn't sure you were
challenging.
going to admit that.
Oh, yeah. No, it's extremely, extremely challenging. So for those of you who don't know, the 50-year-old CEO of United Healthcare was assassinated with a gun with a silencer on it at, I think, 6:45 a.m. Was it yesterday morning?
Yeah.
And something that is happening in New York City that hasn't happened in a very long time, which is there is a manhunt going on in the city.
Do you think he's still in the city?
That was exactly what I was just thinking. I think that they've been relying on cameras to track him.
Staying in a hostel, because I was like, he must have someone who's sheltering him. But if he was staying in a hostel, like,
well, that was before he did it. Maybe he's being sheltered by someone.
Billy thinks he left. He thinks he hightailed it out.
That's entirely possible. But what's interesting is that they have a photo of him. They know what he looks like, and they've been tracing him using cameras that are all over the city. So if he had left the city, I'm wondering how he would have done that without being on every, train.
I know they're using drones
video
in Central Park. So this is going to unfold over the next week or so. There's no question. We're going to get more information like every day.
Yeah. So the other thing that's interesting, well, there are many things that are interesting, but on the two bullet casings that were left on the street where the murder took place, one of the bullets has etched on it "deny," and the other one has etched on it
"deny, defend, depose."
But then they unearthed a memo that the CEO of United Healthcare had released that said the way that we treat our insured customers is to deny the claim, defend the suit,
depose the patient.
So all of that, which is very, frankly, disgusting, this new election has brought on a lot of unhappiness. And as there was violence in 2016 and then 2020, and here we are again, and we have someone who is either, as you astutely brought up, possibly working with a group or a lone gunman who has been affected. Let's assume he's been affected by the way our healthcare, thank you, is so messed up. And how are we to feel about that? Like, every person I know, like, I was on the phone with a friend of mine who had a catastrophic illness all of last year. She actually was given last rites.
Oh my God.
And then unbelievably rallied. She has millions of dollars, millions in medical bills, and is fighting with the insurance company daily to make rhyme or reason of this. And can you imagine? Like, she's still coming back, and her husband is a lawyer. So it's not like they don't know what they're doing, and they're beaten down and exhausted. So I think that I'm definitely dancing around the obvious statement here, but it's very difficult to have a clear-cut feeling about why someone would do this and what would push them to doing something so drastic and so message-based. It's not just doing it, it's making sure that the message is 1,000% clear. And the other thing,
God, the mystery unfolds.
the other thing is, how about this? How did this person know what was in the internal memo?
Internal memo, and he also knew the schedule when he was going to be walking down out of his hotel to go to the conference.
Exactly. This was not a regular routine. This was a conference.
He was about to give a speech.
Right. A conference at a hotel where he had not been before. Where is he getting the information? Is this a new kind of whistleblowing?
Also, his backpack is like $350.
Exactly.
Who knows how much that gun costs? Anyway, this is what's on our brain today. This is what's going on in the city today.
Never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment. So, the term anger management?
I feel like that's a very pointed question.
Or rage issues. My question is...
I do.
Now we bandy these terms around. We know exactly what they mean. We know the ramifications of having...
There's even an Adam Sandler movie called Anger Management.
Yes, there is. And having rage issues and having, your anger not dealt with in therapy. Thank God for that. All this kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
When we were growing up, was that terminology around? Or did people just get yelled at and you just had to sort of suck it up? I'm trying to hearken back to
there was absolutely...
That's your problem. Why are you yelling at me?
Let's dig in a little deeper because I have thoughts on this subject, which is...
I thought you might.
Who has anger management problems for the most part?
Men.
And who in that time period would report domestic violence and be told, go back home? Women. The idea of anger being a problem that leads to violence, all of that, I feel, fell firmly under boys will be boys. And sort of we know it's not good and it could lead to something bad, but what are we gonna do about it? Also in the 80s, and we know this from what we've researched and from our own experiences in offices at the time, these people who were heads of departments or, owners of businesses, there was no HR to check them.
Good point.
There was nothing. It was, cult of personality. And if you're bringing in the money or you're the hedge fund guy or whatever, and you're coked out of your mind screaming at people, if you're bringing in the money, it doesn't matter. The one exception to the gender rule that I have talked about on this podcast is that woman who was an editor at Simon & Schuster who choked her assistant.
Right.
And the assistant was just told, oh, well, go to a new department. That's fine. So anger management was absolutely a non-issue.
Okay.
Mm.
My sources...
And it makes me furious.
Awesome. Good timing. Good timing. My sources are New York Post, McEnroe, the documentary, The Guardian, ESPN, and I got the idea for this story from our great friend, Guy Richard Smith, because he went to Trinity at the time that John McEnroe went to Trinity. And when we were interviewing him, he said, we asked him, I can't even remember what the question was. I can't even remember if we left it in the podcast, but I remember him saying, well, you got to understand that when I was at Trinity, that's when John McEnroe was at Trinity. So that sort of Trinity
I thought John
had
McEnroe
that.
was much older than us.
Oh, no, he is much older than us. Not much older than us. He's definitely older than us, but that Trinity had that vibe to it when Guy was going there.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, he's much older than Guy, too.
Okay, so it was just that it was the culture that was acceptable as exemplified by McEnroe.
Right.
Got it.
Because he was a hotshot when he was a kid.
Mm.
Okay.
Again, cult of personality.
Sunday, September 7th, 1980, was the last day at the U.S. Open in Flushing, Queens. John McEnroe was up against Bjorn Borg in the men's singles finals, and their rivalry was already legendary. John grew up in Queens, playing tennis at the nearby Douglaston Club and commuting into the city to attend Trinity. In 1977, when he was just 18, he made quite a splash at the French Open and managed to qualify for the men's singles at Wimbledon. He lost in the semifinals to Jimmy Connors, which is quite the whirlwind. One day, this kid is playing at his local club, and the next, he's sharing a locker room with his heroes, Jimmy Connors, Bjorn Borg, Vidas Gerulaitis. When he was just a little kid, John didn't really want to be a tennis player. But the tennis craze of the 70s swept the nation. Why was tennis suddenly so popular? In 1968, tennis entered its open era, which allowed professionals to compete in major tournaments. And before that, it had just been open to amateurs. So the matches were now more competitive and entertaining, and it became big business. And TV started covering tennis. And now top tennis players were suddenly being treated like rock stars. And that made the whole endeavor a lot more attractive to young John, who came to the game with unique, innate talents. He didn't have a lot of muscle, but he had remarkable timing and a wide variety of shots. He was very good at chess and math. He's a math guy. So he was able to calculate in his head the probability of where a shot would land and predict how his opponent would react.
That is fascinating.
You know his wife now is Patty Smythe?
I thought that they were divorced.
No.
Really?
Really?
As in, oh my God, what is her song?
Hard to survive.
That's it. Bang, bang.
Yeah.
The walls of heartache. Bang, bang.
Bang. Is that what I
We
just said?
are the warrior.
Warriors.
Yeah, maybe it's the
I
same
think it's
song.
the same song. No, I think they're happily married.
How marvelous.
Very marvelous. And what she says in the documentary is he's probably on the spectrum.
The answer to so many questions of the day.
Yeah. All right. He was able to plan a few shots in advance and keep control of the game rather than simply react. So that's how the chess brain came in. He could actually plot out his game.
Mm-hmm.
He's also highly sensitive. He's acutely aware of sound and light and movement.
Ah, well, now Patty's theory is holding even more water.
Right. And he's left-handed, which sends his serves in the opposite direction from where right-hander opponents are comfortable. So that's
huge,
useful. Fortunately, he was able to focus all these attributes and finesse them to his advantage on the court. When he first played Jimmy Connors at Wimbledon in 1977, he was the youngest player and first qualifier to reach the semifinals. He went over to introduce himself before the match, and Connors completely ignored him. And the picture of him, he's got such a friggin' smackable face. He's just,
McEnroe?
He's just all like this, like all squinched up like this. And Connors acted like he wasn't even there.
Oh my God.
And he's just this kid, right? And he's like, oh, hello, Mr. Connor, and Connors is just like, I'm not even going to pay attention to you. You're invisible to me. He acted like he wasn't even worth eye contact. John says he learned a lot from that encounter. Intimidation, getting in the other guy's head, was part of the game. And you kind of have to act like a prick. Most singles tennis players talk about how alone you are on the court. You can't count on anyone except yourself. And another thing John McEnroe brought to the table, anger issues. He could not control himself when he thought the umpire made a bad call. In the summer of 1980, so I started the story in the fall of 1980, but now we're going back in time to the summer of 1980. McEnroe went up against Connors at Wimbledon, and questioned several line calls, argued with the umpire, and snapped at Connors. The British press had already dubbed McEnroe Super Brat, the Incredible Sulk, and McTantrum.
The Incredible Sulk is so good.
This is a quote from The Sun. He is the most vain, ill-tempered, petulant loudmouth that the game of tennis has ever known.
Well, no.
When he made it to the finals against Bjorn Borg, the audience booed him.
Wow.
I know. This is a quote from McEnroe. I was very disappointed in the beginning because I didn't get a good hand at all. And I think it was because of what the people write here. I really don't have anything to say about it, except all of a sudden you do one thing and you're a terrible guy. People read all that crap. By comparison, Borg was cool as a cucumber. He was completely silent on the court, never spoke, and was the consummate gentleman tennis player. His nickname, Ice Borg.
Oh,
He had a routine every time he played Wimbledon. The same hotel in Hampstead, the same locker, the same chair, the same number of towels on center court. He didn't shave or have sex during the tournament. He was the master of self-control. And everyone loved this rivalry, fire versus ice. The Brits clearly wanted Borg to win. And he did, in what is considered one of the best men's finals of all time. There was a fourth set tiebreaker that lasted 20 minutes, which McEnroe won, but Borg ultimately bested him in the fifth set, winning the match. And then, not 2 months later, Bjorn and John meet again, this time in Flushing, Queens. Now, at Wimbledon, in London, decorum is highly valued. Quote, this is from The Guardian. Speak above a whisper on center court and you could be arrested. The guards and ushers are 477 members of the UK's military. Petrified fans in frocks and blazers kindly clap at the end of points as they gawk at their betters in the royal box. Their oohs and ahs are so precise, you wonder if they've rehearsed them. Now, oh, I'm sorry, that was from the New York Post. That was not from The Guardian. The U.S. Open.
Now you're in Queens, baby.
Yeah, a different vibe. Quote, New York tennis fans are disgusting barbarians, only with fewer manners. We are noisy and impolite booze hounds who treat the sport like it's a day at the dog races.
Who says that?
That's the New York Post.
Oh, that's a little extreme.
If John was distracted by the disdain from the Wimbledon crowd early in the year, he felt right at home, literally in Flushing, Queens. Bjorn Borg, by contrast, who valued silence and focus, had to adjust to the rowdy U.S. Open atmosphere. It was also hot and humid. One day during the Open was 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
What?
Insane.
I've never heard of
In
that
September.
being
Yeah,
in
September
New York
7th.
City.
Crazy.
Good God.
And the noise and floodlights used in Flushing were not his comfort zone. And in spite of having won the French Open and Wimbledon that year, Bjorg came to Queens with some trepidation. He'd never won the U.S. Open. Crazy. Also, even though he beat McEnroe at Wimbledon, he got pretty spooked during that 20-minute tiebreaker. McEnroe almost bested him, and he knew it.
How much younger was McEnroe than Borg?
Oh, no, that is such a good question. I should have looked that up.
But we can assume some.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Right.
No, absolutely.
Right. So
No.
Connors and Borg, not only were they just more experienced, but they were older than McEnroe.
Oh, completely.
So that's a really
and
interesting.
He's like this little whippersnapper who shows up, and they've been around the block quite a few times.
What's so great
Yeah.
about the visual of this also is that if anyone has seen the Royal Tenenbaums, the character that Luke Wilson plays is based on what Bjorn Borg looked like at the U.S. Open, and he had his long hair, whereas McEnroe looked like a drinking straw, a bendy straw, like made of bendy straws with an afro, with his sweatband sort of embedded somewhere in the afro. It was pure brilliance how they looked so different.
Crazy. Later, Bjorn described his mental state during that tiebreaker point as, quote, the toughest moment in my tennis career. That walk. I knew John thought he would win the match. I thought he would win the match. And here they both were again, head to head in the finals. Borg's serve wasn't serving him. And McEnroe came on strong at the beginning of the match. But Borg had staying power. If a match went into 5 sets, that was his sweet spot. In 13 straight matches since 1976, he had won every one of his 5 setters.
Wow.
I mean,
that is your sweet spot.
That's a record. And this match was going long. This is a quote from John. Quote, Bjorn, once again capitalizing on my fatigue and his superior conditioning, started inching his way back into the match. I'm positive he had our Wimbledon match in mind. I knew he did. He must have been thinking that I would wilt again, and the king of 5 setters would once more prevail. But Borg's serve failed him again, and McEnroe had a jolt of adrenaline and managed to pull out a win in the final set, which won him the match. In all, they had battled for...
So he's 20 years old at this point.
It's 1980.
So yeah, oh, sorry.
He was
21.
18.
He's 21.
Okay. In all, they had battled for 4 hours and 10 minutes.
Oh my God.
This is a quote from John. When we shook hands, I could see that he was devastated. Now, despite being the world's #1 player from 1981 through 1984, McEnroe was offered very few endorsement deals. According to a Madison Avenue ad agency, quote, when I see McEnroe, I see bad sport. I wouldn't want him identified with my product. And he was fined all the time for his abusive conduct on the court. In 1987, he was suspended for 2 months and fined $17,500 for misconduct and verbal abuse during the U.S. Open.
What's interesting is that advertisers didn't want him, but he made people tune in.
Oh, yeah.
And
it was
because it's not just the yelling.
Watch.
He would throw his racket.
Oh, my God.
I think he once did something that like hurt a ball boy. Like he was, to say he was out of control is the understatement of all time. It was like watching him was like he went into a fugue state, and the throwing,
what
was
he says in
crazy.
The documentary is that for the most part, and, we've got to take it with a grain of salt, what he has to say about himself, right?
Clearly.
But he said that when it was coming out of his mouth, he thought it was going to be funny.
Oh, God.
And then it wasn't. It was always horrible. I mean, he called people names. It looked like pure rage, and he could not stop himself. But there was something in his head that he thought, this isn't going to be a big deal. And then it was always a huge deal. And also he said, this is the deal. I knew when it was in because I can see things. Remember, he's very sensitive. Mm-hmm. He thought he knew better. He had no doubt in his mind that the umpires actually were not doing their job properly. It
is hard to take when you are on the losing end of someone else's decision. Yes.
That's a life lesson.
That's a life.
Holy crap.
That's a takeaway, John.
Wonder when that's ever happened.
And also,
always.
Did it only happen to you?
Right.
Right? Like it happened to all of the players at one time or another.
And Borg never said a word. He would just take it. And that actually got in McEnroe's head because he couldn't get him all riled up. They ended up I think they're all very respectful of each other. I didn't get the sense that he and Connors ever like shook hands in a nice way.
I'm under the impression that Jimmy Connors was also known for being a dick.
I think he was kind of the first. Well, that's the thing. Like when he first played him, he was like, "Oh, I can be a prick? Awesome."
Yeah.
But he and Bjorn Borg ended up having a great mutual respect. Bjorn Borg retired very early at the age of 25. He just walked off the court. And that was very, very upsetting to McEnroe because he was looking forward to, playing him for many years to come. And when they did speak about it, Bjorn Borg said, "Someday you'll understand because tennis isn't everything."
I just got chills. I don't know why. But yes. How wise at 25?
At least about this. And again, you have to take everything these guys say with a grain of salt. They've been asked all these questions so many times, and there's definitely like a legend building.
They've polished their story quite well.
I think so. But it's a great documentary. And Patti Smythe is really engaging, and she's got a lot of insight. I think she puts up with a lot, though. I think he's chilled out considerably, but he's still all about this himself. And everybody else kind of has to just kind of live with that.
Yeah, I mean, and just to go back to your original question, which was anger management, like what was it? The other thing to keep in mind about McEnroe is that people loved to hate him. It was the show. There was no one who was like, wow, this guy really, like, he needs to go to a facility, like get himself worked out.
Actually, he was court ordered to go to therapy. He said he's been to over 37 therapists.
And yet
he
prevails.
Smythe and McEnroe live in a duplex on the Upper West Side of Manhattan.
Great.
Yeah.
All right.
That stayed with me when Guy said that about just the vibe of Trinity at that time. And he said it was about John McEnroe. And I was like, what is it about that? That's right. That was kind of like fascinating and cool. And like, I mean, people were mesmerized. They were like, what the hell is up with this guy?
Yeah, because he was so young. It really came off as genuinely having zero. Like you see people who break, like they have a moment and they behave really poorly. This was a guy who had zero filter 100% of the time.
Right.
And so watching him was just like, it was a guaranteed car wreck.
I guess I also wonder whether that's of the times. Like, was he affected by, like, was he that way because of the 80s? Did the 80s become that way because of him? Is there not a correlation? Am I just like making a stretch?
No, I don't think, no. I mean, I think the real question, and this is what I started to
and he also had cocaine problems.
Oh, great. You add cocaine to that. Well done, John McEnroe.
Yeah.
Well, that's very 80s.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I think the point of it is not our anger problems of a particular era. It's how are they dealt with and tolerated. And I think that at that time,
kind of glamorized.
It was glamorized. And again, in no small part, thanks to finance. And that it was like, if you were a bully, on the floor, on the trading floor, or you were a bully at, a bank and doing mergers and acquisitions, and you were a pirate and, getting a corporate raider, doing all that stuff, that aggression was glamorized and rewarded. Younger people even affected some of those traits.
I think so.
And a lot of the things that you've talked about that have actually been crimes that you have covered are about this exact issue, that it's anger snapping and there being no conversation at the time around how unacceptable that was, and as evidenced by the other stories that you've done. It's like, well, what did the woman do to deserve this? Or what did the victim do, whoever the victim is, that, like, well, yeah, people are violent. Or people get angry.
Now he is a commentator. They call him a color commentator.
Yes.
And at least he gets paid very well to be kind of a prick on TV now.
He did do an ad, I can't remember what it's for, where they used the fact that he was the enfant terrible. And I can't remember what it was for, but they were like...
It's his brand.
Yeah, but they were like maybe it was for a camera, like something that was indestructible, and they had him throwing things around.
Now he can laugh about it.
Can he?
Yeah, actually, watch the documentary. It's also, he's such a New York guy. He considers himself a kid of the city.
Well, he went to Trinity. He is.
He is. And the documentary takes place, I mean, the framework of the documentary is he's walking through the streets at night.
Oh,
telling
interesting.
his story.
Interesting. The other thing, it occurred to me that we don't really talk about this much, but we have talked about the single-sex schools a lot. And at that time, Trinity was all boys. Trinity didn't become co-ed until, I think, 1982. So that only adds to that,
testosterone
stew.
Yeah.
Testosterone
well,
stew.
My son is there now, and he really enjoys it. And we had a parent-teacher conference this week, and I walked through the halls and was just like, I am so proud of you that you are thriving in this place, because it's hardcore.
It's
too.
intense.
It's a pretty intense school.
Well done, Billy. Woo-hoo. I have a question for you.
Yes.
Did you read 17 magazine?
Absolutely. I had a subscription.
Me too. What were the other magazines that you subscribe, if any, that you subscribed to? Was that like the girls magazine that you paid attention to?
I'm pretty sure, besides Mad Magazine, that was my magazine.
Okay. So 17. And 17, my memory is that the readership skewed a little younger than 17. Like it was a little bit aspirational.
That was my experience of it. I was looking at, the spreads that were like fall fashion, back to school. It was like, oh, those are seniors and I'm a freshman.
Like we were 13, 14, 15 when we were reading it. Okay. And what was the vibe of 17 magazine?
Fresh-faced, happy, active. I remember articles like they'd ask Brooke Shields, if you were on a desert island, what would be the one piece of makeup that you'd bring? And I remember her answer.
What was it?
Mascara.
Oh, not a bad answer. So it was very much like beauty and fashion.
Advice. Sometimes they had like,
if a boy likes me.
Yeah, like advice column kind of things. I don't think they had tampon ads. I might be wrong about that, but I don't think they did. I think they had like ads for deodorant.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. No sex, no anything like that, which is what made magazines like Cosmopolitan really, which we've talked about on this podcast, and Helen Gurley Brown just being like, we're going to talk about how you stick it in. Like she was completely out of her mind. How to Give the Perfect Blowjob was a Helen Gurley Brown special. But we're going to go a little further back, and then we're going to find ourselves in the 80s. And what we're going to talk about is women's magazines, but one in particular. But to get there, we have to start in 1972. In 1972, Helen Gurley Brown had a brainwave, and she decided to ask Burt Reynolds to appear naked in a centerfold in the middle of Cosmopolitan magazine.
Crazy.
Which he did. And it was a response to Playboy magazine, which had centerfolds that were exactly like this. And it was her version of a feminist statement. But in 1973, Douglas Lambert, a nightclub owner in Los Angeles, realized how much money Playboy magazine was making. And he thought, I want to do a magazine just like this. And his wife said, wrong. You need to do one for women.
Okay.
And you need to have naked men in this magazine. And they launched on $20,000 of investment, Playgirl magazine. And Playgirl, which was all nude men all the time, was a huge acknowledgement of the sexual revolution. They were taking a gamble that women were going to buy on the newsstand, as well as by subscription, naked men in public.
Can I tell you a really cute story?
Yes.
So short.
Please.
For my 16th birthday, Manaz gave me a multi-tiered gift. And, it's like I had like 5 things to open up, but it was basically like, now you're a woman and you're 16. Blah. And one of the things I opened up it was a stack of dirty magazines that she had gone to purchase, but she'd been so embarrassed to do it that she just sort of like grabbed a bunch and didn't look very closely, and they were male porn. Like they were for men.
Yes.
And when we opened it, we were like, oh my God. That is not at all what we wanted to look at.
Oh my God.
Anyway, it was shocking, and it was hardcore, Jessica.
I was like, oh my God, was it like granny porn? Was it like really deviant and like, ugh. So yeah, that sounds, well, funny enough, Manaz is going to make another appearance on this podcast today. So the wife said nude men, and Douglas Lambert said, if you say so. And $20,000 was a lot of money, but it wasn't crazy money. It was like, okay, we're going to take a shot. He owned a nightclub. God knows what he was siphoning off that nightclub. Another thing to keep in mind is that in 1972, when Burt Reynolds was unfolded in Cosmopolitan, and the year before Playgirl launched, a very, very important lawsuit went the right way for single people. It was Eisenstadt versus Baird. And this was a lawsuit in Massachusetts because Baird was giving a lecture about sexuality at a Boston college at which he handed out contraception. Now, he was not a doctor, so he could not really be doing that. It wasn't the pill, it was foam, but he handed it out. This was a very bad thing because at the time, the only people who could use contraception were married people. Single people could not have access to it.
Oh my God. What year are we talking about?
72.
Holy fuck.
It was a state-by-state decision, so some states you could, but there was no universal approach to this. So getting contraception if you were single was really a crapshoot. So what happened was the lawsuit was decided in favor of, let's just say, single people everywhere, because they said that there was no reason to ban it for married people, there was no compelling reason to ban it on behalf of single people. So the Massachusetts court said, it's over. Okay. Anyone can get it. So that's a very, very big deal because it was a very, very high profile case. So all these other states started falling in line after Eisenstadt v. Baird. So now, not only does the pill exist, but now the pill is in circulation. Keep that in mind. Back to Playgirl. It hits the newsstands. In 4 days, it sells 600,000 copies. It sells out. They have no more. This is massive. So clearly they're onto something, and something is happening with women where they are willing to let their sexuality and let their decisions about what they want to do be public. Big deal. Very quickly, while we're talking about nude men, in 1982, 1980 is really when it begins, but actors start to allow themselves to be featured in magazines nude. In 1982, Christopher Atkins, who had been naked in The Blue Lagoon.
He was too, wasn't he?
He was indeed. And in 1983 was soon to do the same in a film called One Night in Heaven, which I went into, I scammed my way into the 86th Street Theater with Manaz to see.
The best.
The best. In 1982, Christopher Atkins appeared in the pages of Playgirl magazine naked.
Did you see his penis?
I believe you did.
Amazing.
Indeed.
I mean,
what we would have given at the
flaccid?
time. I think Yes, they were never erect,
right?
but
Okay.
it, like,
That would
you know, like,
be
that's artfully
like the
arranged.
magazines that Manaz got me, and that was like very eye opening for all of us at that birthday party. I'll tell you. Like,
So then in 1974, something else happened that was really important. I'm going to ask you a question. When you, Meg, do your holiday shopping, how do you pay for it?
credit card.
Guess what you could not have had control of before 1974 as a woman?
Because I'm a woman.
Yes. So the Equal Credit Opportunity Act allowed women to get a credit card without a husband. What does that mean? It means two things: financial freedom, and that your spending habits are now important to advertisers.
Right. They're going to direct their advertising towards you.
Which means now you have power.
Cool.
That's our background. Now, our dear friend Barbara Goodwin made a few suggestions, and she was talking about, all of the amazing magazines, but this one magazine really stood out for me, and it's called New York Woman. And it only existed for 5 or 6 years. And it so embodies what was going on culturally in 1986 when it launched. And I just love this so much. So I'm going to read a few things to you.
Cool.
A few stats. Beginning in the 1980s, more than half of the bachelor's degrees in America were earned by women. Women got higher paying professional and managerial positions as a result in the 80s. With the Credit Card Act, they have not only financial power, but now career power. They are making decisions in these industries that they were inhabiting previously only as secretaries. Also in 1981, women were showing up in positions of power, like Sandra Day O'Connor was on the Supreme Court in 1981. Geraldine Ferraro, first woman to run for vice president, 1984. And in 1985, Emily's List was founded.
Ooh.
Emily's List is a political action committee that raises money to fund Democratic women for federal office who are going to support pro-choice rights. So all of these things were happening, and women have more and more power. So they're working. At the same time, America was being shown that women could work. How? We've talked about The Cosby Show, which has its problems, but Claire Huxtable, whose husband could have afforded to let her do whatever she wanted to, she was a lawyer and she practiced law. On Family Ties in 1982, Meredith Baxter Birney was a stay-at-home mom, but she was working. She was an architect. So everywhere, women were starting to be seen as working. Working means money. Money means power. Money means you can make your own choices. In 1986, the one magazine that got this zeitgeist perfectly was launched. New York Woman magazine, a terrible, terrible title for a magazine. The number of times that I've written this down and called it New Woman, York Woman, New York.
I can see the shoulder pads now.
Massive. It was launched in 1986 as an outshoot of Esquire magazine.
Okay.
It was only published 6 times a year. It was launched by Betsy Carter, who had been the managing editor at Esquire, and she had a vision. And here's what she had to say. She wanted working women to see themselves represented in a magazine that was not fashion. It wasn't cosmopolitan. It wasn't putting women boobs first. It wasn't putting images of women with glossy lips for the sake of glossy lips on the cover. She wanted sophisticated working women in their 30s and 40s to have something where they could reflect themselves to it and they could be reflected back. In describing her target audience, she says, "We are not linear. We are talking about a sensibility here, defined by a locale. This is the first women's magazine about the power of the city and how it affects a woman's life, whether she lives here or not. I'm referring to sophisticated women throughout the world who are never out of touch with the pulse of New York." What were they putting their fingers on the pulse of? Finance, law, publishing, fashion,
Real estate.
journalism, construction, real estate, and theater. Those were the biggest boom industries in the 1980s in New York City.
Yeah.
And that's what these women who they were targeting were involved in. So this was the antithesis of look pretty.
Right.
Interestingly, and I had such a problem with the title of this magazine, a magazine with the identical title was published for 1 year from 1936 to 1937. And there was actually a headline on one of them, which was how to match your pants with your outfit. And I was like, what is this what Barbara was talking about? That doesn't sound right. As this magazine was being launched, guess what popularity was dropping? All of those women's magazines that were very traditional. Looking for, here's what you do with your refrigerator.
Better Home and Garden?
Yes.
Okay.
All of these where it was about how to be the best housewife going down the tubes. The ones that were on the rise were Working Woman, Working Mother, Savvy, Self, and Ms. Now, when you say it's on the rise, what does that mean? It means how many people are buying the magazine and how many advertisers are pumping money into the magazine. Advertisers only do this if they know that they're going to be able to get the people who are reading the magazine to buy their crap. So they decided at New York Woman magazine / Esquire that they were going to go for the gold. They published one of the most expensive magazines to make. It was 9x11, really heavy, glossy paper. This is big investment, 4-color printing. They were targeting who, if you need a visual, Melanie Griffith in Working Girl.
Oh,
so
awesome. So
when she was
on the rise,
when she was asked who are the people who are going to read this, she said women who are funny, smart, a strong sense of style and taste. They love the theater and they love books. Okay, great. Now Melanie Griffith and even Sigourney Weaver, as awful as she was in that movie.
Very well dressed.
Very well dressed and very acknowledged because those were women. So that movie came out in 1988, but it was greenlit in 1987. Those women were unapologetically reaping the benefits of either their hard work, their education, a combination of all of it, their networking. They were making it happen. And at the end of Working Girl, when you have her in that office and Carly Simon starts singing, that is exactly what this magazine is about. Now, what I loved about this was they invented a new way to get circulation of this magazine going, and it will sound very familiar. They identified the key women who were networkers, who they saw as the typical woman as represented by the magazine. They were high profile, they were trendsetters, and they were movers and shakers. They were in their 30s and 40s. The magazine asked 200 women who fit this profile to compile a list of 35,000 peers. Those 35,000 women got the magazine free initially.
Ooh.
They wanted word of mouth to at least get, forget the subscriptions, they wanted as their proof of concept, 5,000 newsstand sales. And then the subscriptions. The cost of the magazine was $2.50.
Sounds like a lot, actually.
Yes. And in fact, the ads, just so you know, like how they were going for broke, a 4-color full-page ad was $3,975, which at the time was massive.
Yeah.
And people were doing it, and they did it for 6 years. When I say they found 200 women, who then found 35,000 women, who then were going to go off and influence other women to buy the magazine, isn't that what's happening on Instagram right now?
Oh, completely.
They were doing it analog.
Right.
And it worked.
Yeah.
It worked for 6 years. And Betsy Carter went on to found more magazines, and New York Woman, I will never say it properly, New York Woman, the editor of New York Woman left and founded another magazine that was entirely about smart women, Mirabella.
Ah.
So what I like about this story, which I know covers a lot of ground, is that there was a magical time when smart, sophisticated women were absolutely being recognized as a bankable entity. The only thing that's important in the 80s was money. And for women to have been the gamble that Esquire magazine, all of these advertisers that they were going to go for was saying, we understand that the tide has turned and women are now getting more and more powerful and will have a say. And it was true. And it worked. And all of those women influenced all the other women and their word of mouth, and they made it happen. They made that magazine happen.
Amazing.
Even with the worst title in the history
not that
of
weird,
magazines.
Jessica, New York woman.
No, it's just so clunky. It's not pithy.
New York woman.
New York woman, whatever. I think that it's important. The reason I got very excited about this also is that we are in a time when a lot of women are feeling powerless. And what that magazine launch did was show that there was so much power in numbers. And that if you can find a way to show that you have an intrinsic value that is what someone else wants, in this case, advertising, you're going to get it. So not to despair, there is a lot of road ahead.
Gather the troops. Amazingly quick tie-in is
advertising.
How?
John McEnroe couldn't get it.
Okay. And women could.
And women could.
Ha ha ha. Tell a friend. Seriously, really do tell a friend about the podcast.
Yes, please, please. I know I'm chuckling in the background.
It is absolutely the best way you can help us is to send the podcast to a friend of yours. That would be amazing.
We see you all as micro-influencers.